James Perloff, author of Shadows of Power, Tornado in a Junkyard, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw, COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come, Red Pilled. It's 200 densely packed pages with sources, over 300 endnotes. You can use this to battle the zombies on social media, and I highly recommend that you read it. It covers nearly every aspect of this entire psyop. It's divided into 5 sections: the lockdown's human impact, the methodology of panic, the nature of COVID-19 itself, and the deep state's endgame and what may lie ahead. James, as you told us last time, at the beginning of all this, they were locking down on anything to do with COVID on Amazon. And there was this guy, Alex Berenson, reporter for the New York Times, former reporter for the New York Times, who wrote a book criticizing the lockdown. Amazon censored it. And then Elon Musk came around, and he came out in favor of the author and suggested that Amazon be investigated for being a monopoly. And all of a sudden, Amazon loosened up a little bit. So fast forward a couple of months, we last talked October 12th, and I believe it was not even a week later that your book, COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come, Red Pilled, was banned from Amazon for what I think they referred to as creating a poor customer experience. Now, my customer experience was excellent. A lot has happened since. We agreed to talk about the censorship issue. First off, your thoughts on all of these developments since we last talked?
Yeah, well, it looks to me like they're getting ready for persecution. They're censoring any dissident voices, and this has been ramping up. I remember last summer, YouTube was bragging that it deleted tens of thousands of channels that involve conspiracy theories, and it's gotten much worse. I mean, there was a big purge a couple of weekends ago on Twitter, and if I'm not mistaken, one famous tweeter said he lost over 300,000 followers since I've lost about 2,000. And you know that they're not all unfollowing on their own. They're basically being eliminated by Twitter. And when even the president of the United States gets deplatformed, that's really taking it to a level that's never been seen before. Free speech is just going out the window. And of course, the pretext is this, the main one they've been using seems to be this Washington so-called riot, which I never really followed that much. I wasn't that interested, but there was some question that Antifa itself might have been involved, and that a lot of it was psyop and set up. Like they showed the guy who stole Nancy Pelosi's podium was actually ushered in or allowed in by the guard. I mean, this was not, you know, a violent overthrow, but it seems like they are trying to set up as one of their next scenarios, you know, really suppressing and oppressing those who voice dissent, going beyond just censorship on social media platforms, but actually arrest. For example, Dr. Simone Gold, of America's Frontline Doctors, who's been outspoken about COVID, was arrested because she was there with a megaphone at the Washington protest, and all of a sudden that makes her a violent person and a threat to society. So it's, but you know, the same media outlets and politicians who are talking about the threat from the right were never upset by the burning down of Minneapolis by Antifa and Black Lives Matter, or the destruction in Portland or Seattle. And quite the contrary, they're saying defund the police. They're all in favor of the violent protesters. And so you can just see the utter hypocrisy and the utter lack of logic to what's going on. But I think we're definitely looking at a new era of oppression. And by silencing voices that might protest it, of course, you make that oppression more feasible.
The latest victim is My Pillow CEO, Mike Lindell, blasted from Twitter. Are you still on Twitter? Are you still going on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I've lost a lot of followers. You never know when the axe might fall, and I might have to move over to Gab. But I have been completely blocked on Facebook. Now, I've never actually been on Facebook myself, but if you try to share any post from my website, jamesperloff.com, it will be blocked. And we have a share button down there, a Facebook share button, and a lot of my posts had thousands of Facebook shares, and all of a sudden they've been reset, all of them to 0. So even if you try to share a post I wrote on the Korean War, 7 years ago. That is now blocked, and you get a message that says it's been reported as abusive. Well, how could every post on my website be abusive? Somebody posted as harmless humor, So another thing I've been told is that if you mention my website on Facebook Messenger, that will be blocked too. So this is all out. And this, by the way, did not occur until after Amazon banned my book. Now, the day that Amazon banned my book, I didn't realize it was that close to our interview. You mentioned we did the interview on October the 15th. I was going to turn my paperback on COVID, which had been a bestseller on Amazon, I should mention. It sold over 3,500 copies in less than 3 months. It had over 50 customer ratings, 92% 5-star and 8% 4-star, and not one customer gave it 1, 2, or 3 stars. And that's a pretty good record. So when they told me that they had the right to decide what was a poor customer experience, I said, aren't your customers supposed to decide that? And it was funny. It was the night of October the 15th. I was going to launch the digital version of that book the next day. And that's when I got hit with this email from Amazon. And one way you know this is phony is that they gave me 2 separate reasons for removing the book. The first email said they were temporarily removing it because I had failed to specify my rights for the book in certain overseas territories. Now, this is impossible. You cannot upload a book onto Amazon print on demand without specifying your rights. If you try to do that, the computer program they have won't let you progress further. And I actually have screenshots showing that I did specify my rights. You have to do that. But I tried to comply with that, and they were preventing me from complying with it by blocking me from the web page where you work on the details of your book. And I figured a way around the block, but in the meantime, they sent me a brand new email. Now they were saying they were going to permanently ban my book. Again, that's COVID-19, and the agenda's come red-pilled. And they said they're going to permanently ban it now for a totally new reason. Now it had nothing to do with rights. Now I had violated their content guidelines. And so, my book is documented with endnotes. Everything I say in the book, every statement and every stat is documented. And I reference epidemiologists, virologists, frontline medical doctors in ERs, virologists, microbiologists, and these include Nobel Prize winners. Everything comes from a credible source. And I don't think Amazon has any doctors that are able to refute what's in my book. So I said, okay, so what content guidelines did I violate? And the answer I got, actually, Rob, as I'm sharing, this is very typical of the way YouTube and these other platforms operate. They don't tell you any specifics. The answer I got was, quote, "We reviewed your book and found that it is in violation of our content guidelines and will not be offering it for this title for sale on Amazon." So no specifics. I pushed this on them, and finally I did get a slightly more specific answer. It said, "Due to the rapidly changing nature of information about coronavirus, we're referring customers to official sources for advice about the prevention and treatment of the virus." Now, by official sources, of course, they mean the WHO and the CDC. Actually, I do refer to the WHO and the CDC in my book. And by the way, my book does not give any advice. If I was giving some quack home remedy on curing coronavirus, it'd be one thing. But I don't do that. The book is it's all documented, and I do a couple times reference doctors who have had success with hydroxychloroquine, and I studied a study from Northwestern University that shows that people with low vitamin D levels are more susceptible to COVID and to death from COVID. But that's not personal advice, on how to cure COVID. So the whole thing was a phony. They were just grasping at straws. And I when I wrote a blog post about this, I mentioned that Jeff Bezos is getting rich off the lockdowns. So naturally, they don't want books out there that are going to oppose the lockdowns, no matter how valid.
In your latest book, pages 54 to 55, YouTube's Susan Wojcicki's quote, "But anything that goes against WHO recommendations would be a violation of our policy," which is obviously absurd given that the top funder of the WHO is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
That's right. Well, what I mentioned in the book was that the World Health Organization often changes its mind. Originally the World Health Organization said you don't need a mask. Then they changed their mind and said you do need a mask. And they said that the asymptomatic spread is not a danger. Then they said it is a danger. Now, most recently, somebody again has been saying it from the World Health Organization that you don't need a mask. That's just in the news like in the last day. So the World Health Organization contradicts itself. So how can you be censored for contradicting the World Health Organization when the WHO contradicts the WHO? We're in this era where people make statements that don't make any sense, that don't have any logic to them. And this applies to mainstream journalism as well as these leaders of these platforms that dominate people's thinking today.
And to expect logic from these people is probably going to leave you disappointed at every turn,
Right.
because your disappointments are equal to your expectations. The absurdity of this, the randomness, the silliness, and now even I'm hearing, 2 masks, maybe 16% more effective than 1 mask. The Chinese anal swab that's out there. Now you have a virus that is so virulent that you have to stay 6 feet away from everyone at all times, yet to detect it is to submit to a torture ritual involving a private part of your body. And like you mentioned, throughout this psyop, time and time again, if anyone still believed the mainstream narrative after they told us that not only did Black Lives Matter protests not spread the virus,
Right.
it slowed the virus. And anyone who bought it after that point, I just don't know what to say anymore. I constantly am doing battle on social media and in my real life with
Right.
what are the things that you hear from time to time for people who doubt the dissenting voice?
Well, in my book, as we were saying, I have hundreds of endnotes from experts from around the world who doubt this. But what I've been doing, actually, Rob, on my website, I have a page called COVID Book Updates. And I knew that after my book came out on August the 20th, more information would emerge, but there was a point at which I had to publish the book. And I could always update the book itself, but when you update a book, you have to change the endnote numbers and the index, and it's a lot of work to update a book, actually. So I felt for the time being, let's just update this. But there's been so much information coming out lately, and just as examples of stuff that's not in my book, we had the editor of Hazmat magazine come out. He was the editor for 25 years. And he spoke of the dangers of wearing masks. And he said that when you use these hospital masks, these blue masks, you're breathing in carcinogens, which he listed. And of course, there was information from Kerry Mullis, which I had not heard. I mean, Kerry Mullis said, Dr. Fauci doesn't know anything about anything. That just turned up all of a sudden, an old video by Kerry Mullis, who is the inventor of the PCR test, who said that it cannot diagnose an illness. And yet the guy who says it can't diagnose as an illness, well, they're using his test to diagnose illness and quarantine people. It's so crazy. But another one that came out within the last couple of weeks was a study from China of 10 million people. And they could not find a single case of asymptomatic transmission, which really reminded me of what Dr. Fauci said at the start of this whole thing, which is he said that the driver of a pandemic is always symptomatic people, never asymptomatic people. That was Dr. Fauci saying that. And we also have another recent study from the University of Florida, which unable to find a single case of asymptomatic transmission. And there was another article that appeared in the British press. It was in the Daily Mail of the UK, and it said, quote, experts cannot find a single child under 10 who has passed on coronavirus to an adult despite a huge trawl of data, end quote. And yet we're keeping kids out of school because they may pass it on to grandma. Well, guess what? There's not a one single case known. You know, science is supposed to be an observation, yet they're using these computer models, which are hypothetical. So they're saying that, you know, hypothetically conceivable, it's possible somebody might transmit this thing. Well, that's, you know, you've got trillions of bacteria and viruses in any human body. And of course, it's hypothetically conceivable that you might breathe or cough and transmit a virus to somebody else who then might conceivably become sick from it. But actually, we're not actually seeing this with COVID. And the data against it is overwhelming, but people just don't hear this information because it's not normally posted on mainstream media. And the people who oppose Dr. Fauci are not featured on CNN. He's the one who gets the microphone, and he's the one who's attached to Bill Gates with his billions of dollars. So, you know, people really have to, I hope that they will reach a point of really questioning the official narrative and seeing that they're hearing things time and time again that make no sense whatsoever. By the way, I'm a registered nurse. Well, I'm a retired registered nurse now. I was a registered nurse for 45 years. But as soon as the thing started, I knew that you don't quarantine healthy people. We've never quarantined healthy people in the history of America. It makes no sense. And in my lifetime, we've seen worse pandemics than this. The Asian flu of 1957, when I was 6, and I got a flu shot from that, and very painful, by the way. But that killed over 1 million people. And the world population back then was only 2.8 billion compared to 8.5 billion today, or approximately 8.5 billion. So that would be like killing 3 million people today. So that was a worse pandemic. And yet we didn't go into lockdown. We didn't think about masks. This whole thing is a control psyop. The deep state has reached a point where they control the political leaders, and the Bill Gates has enough influence of enough prostitute doctors who will then come out and say things in favor of, you know, his vaccine plan, that lies are being told. Now, if you really analyze it, as we've been talking about, it really, the things they're saying make no sense at all. But people need this pointed out to them. And I hope there are enough people out there with enough common sense to see that what we're being told officially is not true.